In the last 3 years, housing prices have skyrocketed, but have wages been keeping up? Have rental rates stayed the same pace? And see if we're actually paying more for our housing than our parents did, and what we can expect going forward. Hey, what's going on? I'm Tyler Grams with Checkpoint Realty. Stick around and make sure you are up to date on the latest real estate information. Now, before we get started with this video, if you have any questions, comments, make sure to give me a call, send me a text, send me an email, and subscribe below. Hit that like button so you can see more information about all things real estate. Now today, we're talking about housing affordability. If you saw my thumbnail, you know that it's not so good. But I want to really go in depth as to how we got to this point and what we kind of look like today in our housing market as compared to the early 80s, late 70s, when interest rates were 12, 15, 16%, and housing prices were so low. While housing prices were low, wages were also lower. So, housing prices may be high, but people are making more money, and the interest rates are relatively low. Of course, coming out of the COVID pandemic, interest rates were astronomically low, 2 to 3%. We've never seen that. We'll probably never see that again. That greatly exacerbated prices. It makes the rates look bad right now, but realtors like to remind us that this is relatively average. Now, I'm going to show you a series of charts today, and it may not be your thing, but just stick around and you're going to get an understanding of where we're really sitting at today. So the data that we're looking at is mostly from about 1985 until May of last year. So there is a little adjustment that will need to be taken into consideration. Housing prices have kind of stabilized. Interest rates are slightly lower than they were at that point, but that doesn't mean that this data isn't still relevant. So the first chart that you're going to look at is just the interest rates. Again, I want to bring up this point that they were significantly higher at one point. We're looking around the late 70s, 80s, before they start to just plummet. Now, for a lot of realtors who have been around since the 70s and the 80s, they will love to spout out that these interest rates today, despite being higher than what they were just a year or so ago, they're actually quite low. But something that's disingenuous about saying that the interest rate today is so average is that they aren't looking holistically. They aren't looking at the total price of housing. So when you're looking to buy a house, and you're not spending all of your cash, you have to consider multiple factors. One of those factors is the price. The other is the interest rate. To really understand the impact of the actual housing prices on the individual, you have to look at the prices compared to income. Because as I said earlier, housing prices were much cheaper, but people were making less money. But that doesn't mean that there's a direct one-to-one ratio that's constant throughout the years. There's actually quite a bit of ebb and flow between the cost of rent, the cost of housing prices, and the median income. So the question becomes, if housing prices are up, whether it be purchasing or renting, have our wages kept up as well? So the answer probably isn't going to be very surprising to most of you, but I like to deal with actual data rather than public perception, because what seems like common sense is not always realistic. So here's the next chart that I want to show you, and it is median housing prices related to the median income levels. And as you can see, in the early 80s, mid 80s, the ratio of prices to income is actually not so significant, around 2-3 times the rate. But as we go in later years, leading up to the Great Recession, you see that housing prices are significantly higher than our median incomes. After that recession, we drop well down. But then, again, we go into the pandemic. Interest rates are low, demand is extremely high, and supply is abysmal. So that skyrockets these prices and leads to the most expensive houses on the market in the last 40 years. Now, prices have softened since then, as I mentioned, and I don't expect it to be quite as high as that 7 right now. Although, as we're going into the spring market, I am seeing a lot more buyer aggression. And despite the interest rates remaining relatively stagnant, I do think that we are going to see higher levels of demand, which will again inflate prices. So what has kind of led us to this moment? Why are housing prices so damn expensive? And the big thing that we are seeing here, at least with this last cycle, is that the supply is just far too low. Now in this chart, I want to show you that as we hit the Great Recession, builders just stopped building. There wasn't money to be made in building when nobody was buying. So they greatly leveled off. So we're going to be seeing this for years to come. As it stands right now, our demand is just far higher than supply. And that's going to just keep pushing those prices up, regardless of what the interest rate is. Now, I made this chart myself. The others are from various sources. But this one, I wanted to kind of paint a picture that really encapsulates what we're paying for our houses in relation to median income. Now, in this instance, I use the baseline of $50,000. I'm holding this value constant. We need to see how much we are paying given the ratio of the housing prices to income and what the interest rates were at that time. The first point, we had a much higher interest rate, around like 12%, but the ratio of housing price to income was much lower, though we still see a much higher payment at this level. And then we kind of drop off in the next data point. We go up before the height of recession, even though interest rates have gone way down. Prices were much higher in relation, as you saw in that last graph. Then we drop down again as the interest rates become much lower. Housing prices soften. The interest rates are low in the 2020-2021 area. The demand is high, so the ratio of housing prices to income is still relatively high, but we're still just about that level. We're still below the level people were paying at that very high interest rate in the 80s. However, once we get into last year, May of 2022, the demand has still been so high. The housing prices are ridiculously high. The interest rates themselves have gone way up into the 6-7%. And as you can see, people buying a house at that time, if they're buying with a mortgage, they are spending significantly more money than people were paying in 2021 and much more than they were paying after the first recession. Now, housing affordability isn't all about just the housing prices. Something I also want to look at are rental prices. Now, renting is something that a lot of us do before we buy a house. And renting allows us the opportunity to move around, a lot more flexibility, and hopefully we're saving some money so that we can put down towards buying a house. People will always tell you that buying a house is one of the greatest ways to build your wealth. And I agree with this. However, it's not always very easy for us to save money when we're going to be putting down a significant portion of money to acquire a new house, especially with housing prices where they are right now. So 2022, we saw significantly higher increases in rental prices, with the leading state being Florida at about 30%. Oregon came in much lower. It was about 38th state with 11% increase, but that was largely in part due to the rental laws that our state passed a few years ago. So here's another chart that I want to show you, and this deals with rental prices versus income increase. Now the data is going to be pretty bleak, and it's going to make you want to jump immediately into home ownership. From the 1980s until now, the rental prices have gone up 150%, while incomes have gone up 35%. Just yesterday, I saw a story from one of my friends on Facebook stating that in 2010, their rent was about $600. The same apartments today are roughly $3,000. Now, there's something that I want to point out. The statistics that I'm using are median prices. Disparity has grown quite significant. There are much more people at the top and the bottom than there had been a decade ago when there was a much more robust middle class. So when you're looking at these rent prices or these housing prices, they are relatively similar regardless of the income levels of the people in that area. So if we're seeing massive increases in rent prices and only nominal increases in income levels, we can almost be certain that the people below that level are paying significantly higher levels of their income to that rent. Now here's another chart that I want to show you. And it just gives a quick overview of how much income we are pushing into our rent. I wish that I had data that was over time, but this is just a snapshot of last year. What we're seeing is that 50% of renters are contributing over 30% of their income to their rent. Now, a study conducted by Zillow showed that homelessness was significantly higher in areas which people were contributing 32% or more of their income to rent. So if we jump over to Oregon for a moment, we did pass that rental law SB 608, which capped rent price increases to 7% plus the cost of inflation, put us about 14.6%. And of course, real estate is very local. Oregon has a very particular market. There's a lot of demand. Prices are very high. It's a very tenant-friendly state, which again can affect the prices that we are seeing. While government intervention is not always ideal and does lead to unseen problems, it doesn't mean that it's always negative. Florida rental prices skyrocketed. They have nothing in place that stops landlords from demanding whatever rent is necessary. The people who are paying for the rents can only afford so much, so eventually those levels will curve. And we do see this, especially in states like California, which has extremely high prices. We do see those big drop in rental prices when we enter recessions. We're seeing it right now, especially in cities such as San Francisco. And I would imagine that these high prices in Florida will also come down. It's not the ideal situation, as people have to have a place to live, so they're going to continue contributing large portions of their income to have a place to stay. They don't have a lot of option. Mainly what they do and what we're seeing is that they incur more credit, more debt. That is kicking the can down the road, but they need a place to live. I was reading an article a few months ago about a market in which demand for rentals was so high that landlords were taking bids for that rent. And you can imagine that the people who are bidding are just trying to earn this place to stay. They may not actually be able to qualify for this. And with nothing in place to stop people from getting into places that they can't afford, it's going to lead to significant issues. It's just not a sustainable model. We are seeing this right now with our housing prices. All the housing prices were bid way up because there was such excessive demand for such a small supply of houses, but it's just not sustainable. So as we can see with these rental prices, they have gone up far more significantly than if we compare housing prices, which work more in a cycle. There's boom and bust. Rental prices, they just keep going up. And that, of course, has led to plenty of other issues. Portland is experiencing a significant level of homelessness, which you can almost be certain is tied to the affordability of our rental market. So looking forward, what are my predictions? Rents are going to keep going up. There are going to be a few markets which they do decline a little bit. California City is a big one. I imagine that the states which have seen skyrocketing rental prices are going to see a bit of those percentage points decline. I also see it right now as being a very challenging time for first-time home buyers. President Biden has made a program for first-time home buyers, and to a degree, buying your first home is almost easier than buying a second home. But at the same time, this program itself could lead to more unintended consequences. If we make it easier for people to buy houses, then that increases the competition for the small supply of houses that we have going, which will in turn lead to higher housing prices, which will lead to less affordability. So even if first-time home buyers may be able to get in initially, that affordability can easily escape them. Because when we're looking to buy a house, what we're really buying is a mortgage payment. And lenders are going to look at the individual's ability to pay that loan. So if the housing price is high, the interest rate is high, that housing payment is going to be very high. In our market, we're looking at houses around 500, 600,000, interest rates around 6 to 7, and we're seeing a $3,000, $3,500 a month payment. Now, I don't know about you, but the average person cannot afford that type of monthly payment. So where do I see housing prices going? I see them going up. I see interest rates remaining stagnant as the Fed is doing everything they can to control inflation. They're trying to get down to that 2% target, and we're still sitting around 6 to 7%. So they're going to keep the pressure on those interest rates. They're going to keep targeting banks. They're going to charge them more to lend out their money, which is going to keep those interest rates high. Supply is still too low. Demand is still too high. Housing prices are going to keep going up. Same with rental prices. So without significant incentivization for builders to keep on building, I can't see housing prices really coming into an affordable level for most people. I want to say this is very much based off of the individual. Because again, these statistics are median housing prices, median income. If your income is significantly higher, you don't have to worry about the housing price. You don't have to worry so much about the interest rate because you can probably afford this higher interest rate. You can put down more money to get a lower interest rate. If you're really wanting to buy now and you can't quite afford it, I do not recommend you buy. There are loan programs such as a 3-2-1 buy down, 2-1 buy down, which essentially you're buying down the interest rate to make your payments for the first, second, up to 3 years less expensive so that you can afford it. But if you cannot afford the base payment, I do not recommend you buying right now. And I understand that renting itself is not truly ideal if you look at this data. But you have to work within your means. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video on housing affordability. If you want more of this content, make sure to subscribe, like this video, hit the notification button so every time a new video comes up, you'll be the first to see it. And it also helps me get this information around. The more people who engage with this video, the more people who see it. So if you found some value in it, others may feel the same. And again, if you're somebody who's looking to move around the Portland area, looking to move out, or if you just have any specific questions about real estate or the economy that you would like me to answer, just send me a message. I'll leave my info down in the description below.